we're going to get down to nuts and bolts now. Talk about the pumper regulations. A lot of you guys are familiar with this already. I've tried to throw some new stuff in here. Questions that come up a lot about car wash pits and some of these other things that are kind of odd, and we'll tell you how you need to deal with those. Sometimes it's not with me. You got to end up going with somebody else at the DNR, depending upon what kind of waste it is. But we'll talk about that a little bit. I wanted to talk about storage and treatment of septage because that comes up more and more now. Give you a little bit on that. I know probably no one's going to be terribly heartbroken that I probably don't have enough to fill an hour and a half. So we'll unless you have lots of questions. So otherwise, we'll get you out to lunch and you can get back to the exhibitors. And so we'll start off here. As most of you know, Chapter 68 is the commercial septic tank cleaner rules, pumper rules, whatever you want to call them. That was passed in 2006. For those of you that are licensed pumpers, you know how much more difficult things got when that passed in 2006. Prior to that, it was a send in your form with $25 and you were licensed. Unfortunately, there's always a couple guys that ruin it for everybody else. We had a couple very loud complainers up at the legislature about two pumpers. One was doing everything exactly right. It's just the yuck factor. The person said, "Oh my God, they're spreading the septage near my house," or anywhere with, near my house. The other guy wasn't following the rules. But I think the yuck factor kicked in over at the Capitol too. You mean they spread human waste on the ground? Yeah, I mean, what do you think they do with it? They even do that with all the stuff that comes from a treatment plant too. Granted, it may be more treated than septage is at that point. But yeah, it all goes on the ground. At that point, so there were some people at the legislature who wanted to ban land application, which would have been disastrous. Because as you guys well know, there's only a handful of treatment plants that take the waste. So we were able to avoid that, but they asked us, the Senate asked us, how much do they pump and where does it all go? We didn't have a clue. So they wrote a law that set up the waste management plans and all of the stuff that we ask you to do now. And I realize that is kind of a pain in the ass. And I sympathize with you when you got to fill those out. Unfortunately, it's in the law, and there's not a lot I can do about that. We are trying to make it easier by moving some of this stuff to our on-site database. We have a database that right now only the counties use. They enter permits for new systems. We have got some of the pumper stuff in there. My hope is at some point, for those that you want to, we'll get you a login for this database. You could go in and fill out the stuff for your annual application without having to send all the paper in again. I'm not sure when exactly that's going to happen because obviously database fixes cost money. So I got to find some money somewhere for that. But we're hoping to make that easier. Otherwise, we're kind of stuck doing things the way we're doing them. As you know, fortunately, Chapter 68 is short. I think it's only 6 pages long. It covers your licensing requirements, your record-keeping requirements, and the land application rules. Most everybody's across the country's pumper rules are derived from the EPA rules, 40 CFR Part 503. And so a lot of the language is directly out of there. For us, in the septic world, septage means domestic waste only. So when we get into the car wash pits and some of this other stuff, it's really not covered by Chapter 68. It may be covered by Chapter 67, which is the biosolids chapter that treatment plants and industries and other land appliers have to follow. It may be covered by another chapter, and I think I mentioned some of those here. But domestic sewage is kitchen and bathroom waste. So if there's more than that, you always want to ask questions about it. And if you have concerns, give us a call. Most of you guys are familiar with the process. You have to annually submit your plan and your waste management plan. Essentially shows where the septage came from and where it went to, which is what the Senate wanted to know when we couldn't tell them. Now we can tell them. That number that I came up with in the keynote presentation, I was surprised it was that large. I knew it was larger than most people would think, but 36 million gallons in 1 year is a lot of septage. Most of it goes to treatment plants. And if the legislature's objective was to reduce land application, they were successful. Because at the time that the law passed in 2006, we did a survey, and about 70%, 75% of septage went to treatment plants. At that point, it's about 90% now. So if that was their intention, it worked. Your fees, are as you guys know, are based on the number of vehicles and the amount you land apply if you land apply. If you don't land apply, you just pay for the vehicles. You're supposed to log every load. I think a lot of guys did that already for their own business purposes, but it wasn't something you had to provide for licensing. Don't send those to me. Keep them on hand. When the counties come around to do inspections, they may ask for those records. So you've got a detailed record of where you picked up the waste and what you did with it. And they're going to ask for those records when they do an inspection. It also has the crop rotation stuff in there and everything. The idea, obviously, is to make sure you don't put too much nitrogen in one spot. Really, that hasn't been a big issue. The total amount you can apply on an acre in a year is 30,000 gallons. We ran some numbers on that, and the average volume on an acre was about 5,600. So we're not getting anywhere near that 30,000 figure. So that's good. And there's some vector reduction method. If you're going to lay it out on the ground and you're not going to disc it in or incorporate it, you have to lime it, essentially. How you do that, there's a variety of ways I've seen guys do that. You dump it directly in the tank, stir the tank up while you're pumping it out and pump it out. I've seen guys use a siphon on their pump line that will suck lime out as they pump it into the tank. I'm not sure how effective that is. There are probably other methods that I'm not aware of. So if anybody who's a pumper has a better method to share with us, let us know. I don't see enough of that happen. I know that's a bit of a pain, but the idea is to make it less attractive to bugs and to kill some of the bacteria. We're raising the pH so high that bacteria can't live. pH of 12 for 30 minutes. So you should have test papers. You can get them at a pool supply. It's just a little paper you stick in there, and it turns a color, and you compare it to the container the strip comes in. It tells you roughly what the pH is. You don't have to have a fancy piece of equipment for that. You also record the loads you take to a treatment plant, and the counties are, calling the treatment plants as part of their inspection to see that, yes, this person actually does come here. So the land application stuff, as I mentioned, was modeled after the federal regulations. I mentioned some of these numbers. Obviously, you can only apply a limited amount on frozen ground. We have vertical and horizontal separation. The biggest issue is the horizontal separation from an inhabited house, 750 feet. If you're in eastern Iowa, it's pretty hard to get 750 feet away from a house because the population density is just a lot higher over there. They didn't give us the opportunity to have somebody sign off or anything like that in the law. We asked if, geez, can we have this pumper, have this person who lives in this house sign to say it's okay? And they won't let us do that because it's not in the law. The 750 number was 200. And when the new rules in 2006 went through, one of our EPC commissioners, the Environmental Protection Commission, which is the group that governs my environmental side of the DNR, they thought that it should be more because it was more for animal waste. And then it became more. So it is that 750. If that is I know for a couple guys I've talked to, that's a huge issue. If that is a huge issue for you guys as pumpers, you need to get together, perhaps through IOWWA here, could help out and facilitate some of that, and you need to talk to your legislators about it. I'd be more than willing to go back and change that rule back to 200 feet if I have the authority to do that. But it's going to take some effort, probably through the legislature, since the EPC was the one who put that in there in the first place. Obviously, we talked about the vector reduction methods. The horizontal separation distances, you guys are familiar with most of those, with streams and that sort of thing, and wells and that sort of thing. It's pretty obvious that you don't want to lay septic right next to a well. Most of them are pretty cut and dried. There are crop restrictions, and those are pretty obvious too. You know, you can't grow potatoes in ground that you just put septic on. You can't grow onions, or you can't grow things that are going to hang on the ground. That really is never an issue here. If we were in California where they grow lots and lots of vegetables, it might be more of an issue, but not so much here. Corn is king here, so I don't think we'll have any trouble with that. Now we'll talk about that non-domestic waste, anything that's not kitchen and bathroom waste. Anything that is not domestic is industrial waste by definition, which kicks us into a whole nother set of rules. So that is what has made some of these other things so difficult to deal with. Car wash waste, we had somebody ask about that already. I know some of you guys do pump out car wash pits. And before I go on, you can pump out car wash pits, and you can pump out grease traps, and you can pump out food processing facilities. We've had some of that too, where they've got some spent material from making ethanol or something. You can pump those things out and then go back to pumping septage. The only thing you cannot pump in your pumped truck is hazardous waste. And most of you probably know that. It requires special licensing and that sort of thing. Car wash waste. Car wash waste is considered petroleum contaminated because there's going to be petroleum, there's going to be antifreeze, that sort of thing in there. There is a chapter for that, chapter 121, I think it is, petroleum contaminated soils. That is what is going to govern this. If you want to dump car wash pit waste on the ground, call the field office in your area, because they're the ones you're going to need to start with. It's not something you can't do, so keep that in mind, but they just want to know. And you want them to know because you don't want them to find out from somebody else. It's a whole lot better if you talk to the field office ahead of time and tell them, I want to put this car wash waste in this spot. How do I do that and comply with the law? If they hear from somebody else, then they're going to be sending you a letter saying you're doing this illegally, da-da-da-da-da. It's a lot easier just call them ahead of time. Grease trap waste. Grease traps are pretty much unregulated. The best place for that waste is the treatment plant. But there's nothing that says you can't land apply it. I would be careful with that, obviously. When you have a town, if you have a larger city like Des Moines here that requires grease traps, and I'm sure some of the other larger cities do, those cities typically will take that waste. Because if they're going to require it, 3,000 gallon grease traps here in Des Moines, which is for some folks really overkill. But they do accept that grease trap waste. And you're going to have a lot more of it, obviously, in those situations because they require every restaurant to have one. So I know a couple of local guys have trucks that are just dedicated to that. So grease trap waste, I just mentioned don't cause a complaint. You know, if you're scratching your head, boy, maybe that's pretty close to that guy's house, or I know that guy, he's kind of cranky. Maybe you should find someplace else. But you can land apply this stuff. And I really don't have any good information for you on how to do it. What we typically do when we don't know that much about a particular waste stream is we have them land apply it like it's septage and follow all the same rules you would for septage with the setbacks and that sort of thing. You're going to be pretty safe if you do it that way. John?
Has there ever been any research done on what grease trap waste does to the environment, what it does to the ground?
I have not seen any.
So they don't, it's not like it's going to be good for the nitrogen using crops or anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
like
think so.
septic is.
You know, it's probably got a lot of oxygen. It's got a lot of biochemical oxygen demand in it. But I don't know about I don't know whether there's any beneficial nutrients in it, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. I will look a little bit.
I thought the whole thing was, to protect the environment. That's why we have all these rules and regulations. And grease trap waste is unregulated. Just go out and land apply it. Don't worry about it.
And that may be largely because it is kind of innocuous and it's not terribly hazardous. Bacteria typically can't grow in it because there's no water. One of the things bacteria needs to grow, but in that grease, there's no water. Well, there is, but in the grease particles themselves, they drive the water away. So, there may not be a lot of bacteria living in that. But that's a good point, and I've stayed away from it because I don't need anything more to do. I do get a lot of questions about it, but as you'll see later when we start to talk about on-farm food processing waste, each one of those things requires a great deal of study to determine what the best way to get rid of it is and what you should do with it. And I don't have the resources to do that study, unfortunately. There you go. Somebody loves it. I'm sure there's some critter out there that loves it. No doubt. We've had a few guys call about food processing wastewater, whether it be a food plant or an ethanol plant or something that has some spent material. That is also industrial waste. So that's something you also want to call your field office on. With the food stuff, what's in it varies a lot, depending upon what kind of food product it is. So I'll leave that call up to the field office. They're the ones that are going to be out there driving around and see something like that. So we'll let them take a look at it. They may have dealt with it before, so they may have more knowledge about exactly what's in a particular product too. It tends to be the same types of things across the state of Iowa. So it's not like we have 100 different things that are being land applied out there. It's probably more like a dozen.
Concerning the car wash waste, and calling the field office, what would you speculate they'll tell us? Most likely.
I think they're going to tell you about this chapter that deals with petroleum contaminated wastes and what the procedures are in there, and whether they want you to register or this person who's producing the waste has to get a permit or not. They're probably going to be able to tell you that too. So to land apply some industrial waste, you have to have an operating permit from the NPDES section that I work for. And so you as a pumper may not really be directly involved in that because they issue those to the owner or the person that's producing the waste. So it may be more incumbent on them to get an operating permit to do that, and they're there to simply hire you to do it. We can get you guys that chapter. If you call the field office or you call anybody else at DNR and you get a runaround, don't hesitate to call me, and I'll try to get with the right person so we can do the right thing with this stuff. Because it's largely grit and sand and stuff like that, isn't it? But there is definitely the potential to have petroleum products in there. And I'm sure you can see a sheen on it most of the time, because a lot of people's cars leak.
Yes, go or something, you just go take it to the land, you just spread it out and visit it for so many times, and then
That's the beauty of, exactly, that's the beauty of the petroleum products is they go away pretty quick if you lay them out on the ground because they volatilize and they go off into the air. So they do go away quickly. But exactly how they want you to land apply that may have something to do with what's in it. So give them a call. We'll try to, I'll try to work with them if they don't know what to do with it. They may actually turn around and call me. But we'll try to figure those things out for you. These things come up a lot. We've never really had real good answers for you guys. I'm trying to change that. But it's going to take us some time. Anything else that you have, I mentioned here that you may need, the operator or the owner of this facility may need a permit to land apply that. We have some engineers that do that. That's all they do is evaluate these waste streams, and then they come up with how much you can put on a particular piece of ground and that sort of thing. So they'll be really thrilled to have more work because they're always whining to me about that already. But hey, we do with what we have. So just a little bit about the pumper inspections. Most of you guys that are pumpers have probably had an inspection by now. I have 2 slides that kind of briefly talk about what they're looking for. And I realize that you guys are also inspected by DOT. And in a streamlined, perfect world government, we would combine those 2 inspections, but unfortunately that's not the case. The law that was passed in 2006 said we had to do inspections. And we are looking more for leakage of trucks and sanitary things, probably more so than the DOT guys worried that you're overweight or you have an unsafe vehicle or something like that. We do contract with the counties to do those inspections, and the fees that you pay us for your licenses get passed directly through to the counties for doing the inspections. We don't get to keep any of it. We tried. They wouldn't let us keep any of it, even for administrative costs. So we pass that all through, and the counties get paid for those inspections. So what are we looking for on those inspections? Like I said, I kind of boiled it down to make it really simple. Your truck has to have your name and your location and your phone number on it. Technically, the rule says your address, and frankly, I don't care if you put your address on that. I should be careful what I'm saying here since they're filming me. But your company, I don't know why you wouldn't want to have your company name on your truck anyway. It wouldn't make any sense to me as a pumper not to have it on there. But your name, your city, your phone number. That way, if someone's out there doing something bad, people can identify that person. So that's what they're looking for there. You get a license. When you get your license, you get a little license to hold in your office. It says business license or something on the bottom. And then you get one for each vehicle that will have your VIN number printed on it. You should keep those in the vehicle. Is your truck in good repair? Does it leak? Is it clean? You know, just keep your truck in good condition and you're good to go. Can it do the job? That has been something that's come up in a couple cases where we have guys who have had pumper licenses in the past who have a plastic tank on a flatbed with a sump pump. That is not sufficient equipment to do the job. You have to have a vacuum truck, in my opinion, to do the job correctly. So those couple guys that had plastic tanks on the back of a flatbed are probably going to have to buy a pumper truck at some point. You cannot run solids through a pump. And some of you pumpers, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a pump expert by any means, but you really need the vacuum truck to be able to adequately pump a septic tank. Dan Miller.
I thought the license number was supposed to be on the truck too.
Yeah, that is true. So you're going to have your ST number on your truck. What I see a lot of guys do, they'll put that on their door or something where they've got their name or something. And we changed the way we did that so you don't have to change it every single year. Prior to 2006, they gave you ST21-06 for the year. And they changed it every single year. We don't do that anymore. So put your ST315 or whatever that number on there. We're never going to change that number, so you don't have to mess with it again. But thanks, Dan. That's a good point. And we mentioned no toxic waste. What about the land application part of this whole thing? They're going to be looking at the vertical separation. They're going to be looking at your records about how much you land applied, the setbacks, whether you have the ability to add lime or not, whether you have any lime or not, whether you have any pH papers, that sort of thing. Storage. We talked about storage. Well, I have another slide later here. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Remember that portable toilet waste and holding tank waste cannot be land applied. It's considered raw waste. It has to go to a treatment plant. So you can't land apply that waste. We won't get into the crop rotation thing. So the record keeping, as you guys well know, there's a lot more record keeping than there used to be years ago. You record each load, and again, we're essentially here we're looking for where'd you get it and where'd you take it. This is essentially what they want you to keep track of. What the inspector is going to be looking at is, does it seem like you've accounted for all your waste? They have a much better idea of being local, how much you pump. We have a fair number of pumpers, and I suspect it's no one that comes to this conference who claim to pump 10,000 gallons a year or something like that. And that may be true for some guys, because I do know that there's installers who have a pump truck that they use sparingly because they don't want to stand in sewage when they're doing a septic repair. But boy, if you're only pumping 10,000 gallons a year, probably not worth having a pumper truck. If that's the case. Maybe it's paid for and it doesn't matter, but that's what we're asking the counties to kind of check up on. You know, does it seem like the numbers that you've given us seem accurate. And are they reporting all the vehicles? We do charge you by vehicle, $150 for the first one, $50 for everyone after that. We do want to count those. If you're using a vehicle strictly for grease trap waste, you don't have to count it. However, we don't certainly want to drive down the road and see you pumping out a septic tank with that truck. So however you may be set up, there aren't a ton. I think the average we had like close to 2 as an average for the number of trucks people had. It was a little under 2 when I averaged. But we do have guys that have 6 or 7 trucks in some of the cities. So we want to make sure if you're using it for septage that you've reported it. So I wanted to give an opportunity for questions about the inspections themselves. We just started doing them here in the last couple years. I'm certain that we can improve the process. We did a couple webinars with the counties. We did these inspections when I worked in Illinois, so I had a little experience with doing them over there, and it's pretty much the same thing. But if there are questions or comments about the inspections, how we might make those easier, I would be glad to hear them, whether it be now or you know my phone number, give me a call, send me an email, and we'll see what we can do about that. We could set up some more trainings if people want to do that. My goal originally was to hopefully get a few pumpers involved in those trainings. I still plan on doing that, but I haven't had time to do that yet. I do have a guy that works for me that takes care of this stuff, and he doesn't really like public speaking very much, so I may try to have him set him up, and I can just show up and give the spiel. But keep that in mind. If you've been inspected, something seems silly to you or something, let us know. We're willing to make the program better. So storage has come up a lot lately. And very often I'm having someone ask if they can store septage in an old hog pit. And first thing I thought was, well, the thing probably is watertight. But what I couldn't get away from is that it's gonna be a nuisance. It's gonna smell bad. Somebody's gonna complain about it. I finally had some time to look into it a little more in depth, and actually I think it was the University of Minnesota, and some of those folks are here today, did a study on which states allow storage of septage and which ones don't. And I think they ended up with about 10 states that allow it. 8 of those states required the storage to be in a vessel, in a tank, in something enclosed, which makes sense to me. Then we don't have to worry about odors and that sort of thing. Michigan allows people to have 600,000 gallon open pits, which just seems like a disaster waiting to happen to me. But we mentioned storage in Chapter 68 in one spot. We don't have anything in there that's very descriptive or anything, but I know for some of you guys that land apply, storage would be very useful. So what we're gonna do is you can have storage. It's gotta be a watertight tank. In almost all cases, the guys are using the storage for a more favorable time when they can land apply, and that's fine. We are gonna ask the counties to look at that storage tank if you happen to have one, because we wanna make sure that it's watertight. How big it is, those sorts of things, I don't care. If you've got a watertight tank you want to store septage in until you can pump it back out and land apply it, that's okay with me. So it says storage, I think, in one spot in Chapter 68. That's what I'm running with here to try to help some of the situations where you can't land apply right now. It's too wet, it's frozen, whatever. We want to be able to deal with that. I got a picture of a giant underground tank there you could use. We have a guy who's got several trucks, goes out and does a lot of pumping in a wide area. He is going to station tanker trucks in some areas and dump into those. And then when it's full, he's going to go hook up with a tractor and pull that to the treatment plant. It's purely a gasoline issue, I think, or fuel issue for them. that's fine as long as that truck is watertight. And we make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to with the septage later on. So if you're looking at a tank in the ground, you might look at the septic tank requirements in Chapter 69 if you want to put a tank in the ground. Large concrete tanks are usually pretty expensive, though, but that is an option. I think my next slide is on treatment, which is a little more difficult subject. We have one treatment facility in the state for septage, and it's here in Des Moines, and they dewater the waste. This top picture is a dewatering device, somewhat similar to the one they have. They take 80% of the volume out, and so they end up with a pretty dry material that they can land apply, and the rest of the water actually goes to the treatment plant. So these folks have a kind of a unique setup. I guess what I'm getting at is it's not just, we've had a couple other pumpers propose septic systems or some sort of treatment system for their septage. It's not going to work if you're just trying to build a really big septic system. The waste septage has a really high BOD, can be up into the tens of thousands. So you're probably going to need to treat it more if you want to try to take the water out of it and put the water into the ground. You're going to have to treat the hell out of it. Because you're taking waste from multiple locations and taking it to one treatment facility, that treatment facility is public, and you have to have a DNR construction permit for it. So I know that makes it more difficult for you guys who maybe thought about doing that, but that is probably the best way to set that up. You're going to need to get an engineer to design a system that you can treat septage at. If you are interested in doing that, I would put a plug in for the Pumper Show. And many of you have probably been to the Pumper Show. I never have. I would love to go there. It looks like just one of the best conferences there is. But a lot of these treatment facility folks and dewatering devices and stuff show up there. I know the gentleman who did the treatment facility here had the assistance of the company that made the dewatering device. So I think these companies would be very willing to help you try to set something up, but just keep in mind, an engineer is going to have to be involved, and you're going to have to get a permit from our department, our wastewater engineering section, in order to do that. That is a lot more prevalent in other parts of the country, particularly out east where population density is a lot greater, and they don't land apply in a lot of those states out there. So there are a lot more of these treatment facilities in the east. It's just something we've never had to do because we got lots of wide open spaces, but the time may come when that proves to be more difficult. If I've heard one thing from pumpers is, land application is a pain in the ass, and if you didn't have to do it, I don't think very many people would do it. You'd much rather take it to a treatment plant and dump it if you could. We can't make the treatment plant accept your waste. They have to make a decision on their own whether they can accept your waste and still meet their permit limits. So typically it's going to be larger treatment facilities or somebody with activated sludge or something beyond a lagoon. Now I know there's systems out there that are lagoons that will accept your waste, and if they feel like they can accept it and not damage their lagoon or go over their limits, that's fine. That's their decision to make. So if you're working with one of those folks, go for it. I mean, if they're willing to take your waste, we're not going to say that you can't take it there. However, they have to be very careful. We had a town that had a new system, 3-cell lagoon, fairly new, thought that they could take a whole lot of waste. Wow, would they make money from it? They charged for it. And they took so much waste that they damaged their system and went over their NPDES limits on their brand new 3-cell lagoon that was maybe only 3 years old, and our department had to tell them at that point that they could not accept septage anymore. So you may run into something like that as well. So, Steve.
Something like that cheaper than just using the state system, I think it'd be simpler this way. Hey, I can't imagine the city charges $200-300 to go to cities that didn't go more than that to go on.
I guess you got to have volume. You'd have to have a sufficient volume to make it pay for itself. We do have a handful of guys that pump over 1 million gallons a year, and it seems to me you'd have to be up in that range to make something like that pay off. But you're probably right, and it does differ obviously a lot from Des Moines treatment plant to XYZ plant and how much they charge. Corey?
There's nothing restricting a pumper from holding it temporarily before they dump it, correct? You know, if they want to do a holding facility, they could, if they have a multiple operation, or they want to take it back to their holding tank somewhere, or temporary portable holding.
No. No, as far as the storage goes, whether they're gonna, in most cases, people that want storage want to do it for a more favorable time to land apply. But if they're legally disposing of the septage, I don't care what they're using the storage for. All right, we'll talk about on-farm food processing. I don't know that a lot of guys are gonna get involved in this a little bit, but some of you have heard me talk about the goat cheese lady. And we had a gal who makes goat cheese on her farm with her own goats. She uses the milk from her goats, and she makes goat cheese. And that's industrial waste. It's a food processing facility. And you can't put that into the ground without EPA approval. Domestic waste only. That's what Chapter 69 is set up as. No industrial waste of any kind if you read the private sewage disposal system definition. It's any system that serves 4 or fewer homes, or the equivalent of 16 or fewer people, I think is the definition of a private sewage disposal system. And we've equated the 16 people to 1,500 gallons a day. You guys are all familiar with that. If you have something that's not domestic waste, though, it automatically gets kicked up to the DNR for permitting. You can't put industrial waste in a septic system. The reason for that is there's the underground injection control program that's administered by EPA for our state. We don't do the program at the DNR. Region 7 office in Kansas City administers the underground injection control program. That is a program that monitors what people put into the ground. And what they had in the past that precipitated these rules was people injecting chemicals into the ground, and it was polluting people's water supplies. One of the most famous ones was a dry cleaner. They had a septic system for a dry cleaner that was outside of the sewered area, and they put a bunch of dry cleaning chemicals into the soil absorption system they had. They leaked directly into somebody's water supply. And apparently dry cleaning chemicals are nasty chemicals. So if you're gonna have industrial waste and you're gonna put it in the ground, you have to get EPA's approval. Well, that's what we told the goat cheese lady. And we told, well, she says, you know, she only produces this little tiny volume of waste. They've always had the option to have a holding tank and just simply have one of you guys come and pump it out, take it to the treatment plant. That's still probably the best option for these folks. But when she approached the county about putting a tank and a drain field in for this, they called me and I told them they couldn't do that. It's industrial waste. You can't put it in the ground. Oh, well, I don't produce. There's nothing in it. It's just bleach water, she said. It's just bleach water. Well, having been a food inspector before, if all that's going down the drain is bleach water, you're not cleaning your utensils and stuff very well, because there's got to be milk waste in there, which has a really incredibly high BOD. Milk waste, BOD, our standard household waste is like 300, no more than 300 for the BOD. Milk waste is 2,000. Winery waste can be 5,000. So not only is it prohibited by the underground injection control program, you're going to blow up a soil absorption system putting waste that strong into it. And it's not going to last very long. So we're not just beating our chest and saying it doesn't meet the regulations. This system isn't going to work for you very well because of the high strength of the waste. Ultimately, she thought that was terrible, and she drove to her legislator, and I talked to the gal, and she's a nice gal. I think she was getting conflicting information too, which is very often the case. So they decided they would pass a law that said that if you are an on-farm food processor, and I think I have the definition on the next slide, and you produce less than 1,500 gallons a day, you can land apply that waste. And originally when the law passed, it said that a commercial septic tank cleaner had to be the one who collected that waste and land applied it. And so that's how it ended up in 68. And I think I just stole the thunder from my last frame here, but that's how it ended up in Chapter 68. We wrote the rules, we went to get the rules passed, we gave it to the Winery Association, and this gal who made goat cheese, and they thought that our rules were terribly overburdensome and onerous. I mean, what they were reading was the record-keeping part. Oh my God, look at all these records we got to keep. But it was the pumper who was going to have to keep these records, and it was the very same records that you keep already. So for pumpers, it wasn't a big deal. They didn't see it that way. They wrote a bill last year to strike the requirement for a commercial septic tank cleaner. So these people who are wineries mostly and cheesemakers, those are going to be the two that probably come up the most, although the definition is much more extensive than that. They can now, if they meet the definition, land apply that waste themselves. Great, huh? They wanted us to leave them alone. I don't need any more work. We're going to leave them alone. We're going to give them some guidance. They still have to land apply it according to the septage rules. Actually, we did some study of this, and you know, I had to know what's in cheese waste, what's in milk waste, what's in winery waste. Well, we know they have these real high BODs. Well, they also included meat processing and canning and bakeries and all this other stuff. And to do this right, we would have done an extensive study of each one of these waste streams and decided what they should do and how much they could put on this piece of ground. Well, who has the expertise? Not me, or the time to do that? Not me either. We're just going to land apply them all like septage. And we had some backing for that too. Wisconsin allows the land application of dairy waste. And when I looked at their requirements, they were almost identical to the requirements for septage, which allowed me to breathe a big sigh of relief and say, oh my God, we're just going to make them all do it like septage, because the septage rules are pretty restrictive as far as setbacks and that sort of thing. So everybody has to apply this with following the same rules that you guys have to apply for septage. We are giving these folks, there's only a couple of them that have even come forward to this point, we're just giving them guidance and saying this is how you got to land apply it. If they don't do it that way, the only way we're going to catch them is if they cause a fish kill or something like that. Unfortunately, we hate to be reactionary, but in this case, I don't see that we can do it any other way. So they've always had these options. They could build their own treatment plant because it's industrial waste. They could put a holding tank in and have it taken to a real treatment plant. Or they can put it in the ground. They can build a soil absorption system if they want, but they still have to have an engineer design it, and they got to call EPA in Kansas City to get an underground injection control permit. Nobody's going to choose that. Nobody's going to choose to build a treatment plant either if there's small operations. So I think we're going to still end up with most of these folks having holding tanks that you guys are going to come and pump out. If they ask you to do that, and it's some kind of food waste, it's winery waste, it's goat cheese waste, whatever it happens to be, you see the list here. You know, just land apply it the same way you would septage. They added two definitions to Chapter 68. The food commodity, because they use this term in the definition of an on-farm food processor. As you can see, is derived from an agricultural crop and intended for human consumption. My favorite phrase in law, includes but is not limited to, which means anything. Milk, eggs, vegetables, fruit, nuts, da-da-da-da-da. In a processed state, dairies, pastries, pies, meat, poultry products. We have had a couple guys that are small-scale chicken farmers that we've talked to about this, and they do produce very little waste. Wineries actually produce very little waste. I did meet with the winery folks. The guy who's the president of their association actually composts his waste. And I'm told that that's a fairly popular method for most of those guys. None of our wineries are of a scale that is going to produce waste, huge waste streams by any means. And if they get over that 1,500 gallon a day thing, then they still have to build a treatment plant, essentially. So here's the definition of an on-farm food processor. It's a farmer who is making a food commodity that we previously defined from animals or plants or something that he grows on his farm, essentially. As you can see, they included dairy, creamery, winery, distillery, cannery, bakery, meat or poultry processors. I added this last part at the request of the Farm Bureau because some farmers process their own food. And if they're going to eat it themselves, they didn't want them to be included in this. So if they're going to process food and eat it themselves or serve it to their guests, they are not part of this. But they can be in any one of these businesses, and if they produce less than 1,500 gallons a day of waste, they may fall under this, this new definition and be able to land apply the waste from their food processing activity. You guys don't have to worry about whether they meet that or not. Send them to the county, send them to me. If we determine that they meet this, you may be the one they call to land apply the stuff. Or a lot of them are going to do it themselves, but the ones that don't have any equipment, which I'm thinking is a fair number of them, they're going to be calling you guys to do this land application. I don't know that we're going to see a ton of this because frankly, before this whole law passed, I heard about this once or twice a year, maybe. So I don't know that it's going to ever be a big issue. So the options that they have are some of the same ones they've always had. You know, they're going to have the same requirements that you guys would have with septage. If they produce less than 1,500 gallons a day, the 30,000 gallons per acre, same rules as septage. We do say that they have to land apply it according to the septage rules. Dan?
Do the counties have to inspect these sites?
No. No. They want us to leave them alone.
I mean, I guess.
You trying to find work for yourself there, Corey?
There's not very many of them, but.
I would inspect them based on a complaint only if I were a county person. You know, if somebody comes in, they're asking about it, then great. You know, we can try to help them do it right. But, and because I mentioned earlier for car wash waste and some of these other industrial type wastes, the owner might have to have an operating permit. Actually, the law says you have to have an operating permit. We had to put a clause in Chapter 68 that says they don't have to have an operating permit either. And so we're essentially, the legislature wanted us to leave these people alone. There may be some cases where we're going to have to step back and look. Is the guy a food operation, like a restaurant, or is he a food processor? It's a food operation. If it's a caterer or a restaurant or something like that, they got to have a septic system just like any other country restaurant would have. And that's a whole nother subject. We could talk about high-strength waste. Some of you may have gone to our high-strength waste class, but restaurant waste is a lot stronger than you think it is. And so if you're going to permit a system for a restaurant, you're going to need way more than you normally would have to make sure that that thing lasts for a while. It's a little bit different than your standard domestic waste, but it's still kitchen waste. So a restaurant still falls under domestic waste. It's just the dividing line whether they become a food processor or not. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. Why is it in Chapter 68? I fought like hell to keep this out of Chapter 68. It really belongs in Chapter 67, if you ask me, because that's the industrial waste land application rules. But because it said a commercial septic tank cleaner had to do it originally, it ended up in Chapter 68. I don't think I'm going to have much luck getting it out of Chapter 68 now and moved over to Chapter 67. So it's probably there to stay. But that is why it's in Chapter 68, even though it no longer says that you have to be a commercial septic tank cleaner to do this. I think that is all I have. If there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them.